I'm Claire. Welcome back to DORA Talks, the limited podcast series from Thomas Murray, in which experts from the worlds of banking, funds, risk management and cybersecurity explore the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act. Your host for this series is Shreeji Doshi. Shreeji is working with our cyber advisory team as its Director of Governance, Risk and Compliance. In this episode, Shreeji is in conversation with Panos Kiziris. Panos is a Director of Financial Market Infrastructure here at Thomas Murray and a member of our Risk Committee. Panos and Shreeji discuss some of the specific challenges faced by FMIs when it comes to DORA, especially in smaller markets, and whether or not we can expect the regulators to offer any 11th hour extensions on the compliance deadline.
Thank you, Shreeji, for taking the time to answer my questions. So just to kind of set the framework, if you like, because the conversation today is about implementation of DORA and how prepared the different financial entities are. The timeline is DORA or the Digital Operation Resilience Act was published in late December 2022, but it has implementation deadline of mid-January 2025. So that's less than 12 months as of today, which is it's coming fast. And it is a question of how prepared the different entities are. And when I say different entities, the ones that are affected by it are all the financial entities that operate within Europe. And that captures FMIs as well, financial market infrastructures, whether CSDs, central security depositories, or central counterparty, CCPs. So from that perspective, from an FMI perspective, I've been talking last year with some CSDs in Europe, and it's been a mixed bag, if I'm being honest. Most FMIs have already dealt with similar issues, or they have put in place a robust risk framework in general out of other regulations in Europe, whether it's EMIR or CSDR. But DORA kind of changes these now. I guess makes them more granular or more specific to certain risks. So I guess my first question to you, Shreeji, would be, all right, the CSDs have a certain risk framework now in place because of CSDR, but how does that change because of DORA? Are there now more specific requirements that are coming in?
You spot on when you say that to a certain extent, FMIs would have not that greater of an impact of DORA because there were already risk management principles that have been forced upon by CSDR. Additionally, there was also 2018 guidelines based on IOSCO guidelines, which is cyber resilience oversight expectation of FMIs. That kind of also had regulators pushing CSDs in individual markets to kind of undertake some sort of cyber resilience already. In principle, there would be limited impact because of these two aspects. However, from whatever I have read about DORA and at a regulation level, there are certain requirements that are fairly prescriptive. Like they've not let it to generalized statements on a requirement level specifically. A couple of examples that come out of my head was risk management should sit under either a control function or an audit function, or you have what clauses needs to go in ICT third parties. Like it's fairly prescriptive. How do you classify a significant incident? Like it's given all the parameters now. All of these would somewhat be implemented in the FMIs, but they might have to relook at the regulations to see, are they covering all their bases on these prescriptive requirements coming out of DORA. For CSDs, there are two very explicit requirements. One of them is that they would report back their business continuity test results, ICT business continuity test results, to the competent authority. The second one is they will ensure that there is a secondary processing site available at a geographical distance to ensure the availability of the systems with capabilities, resources, functions, and staffing arrangements already in place. So these are two specific requirements when we come to CSDs. On the central counterparties, there is a requirement to have a recovery plan such that it enables them to recover all transaction at the disruption time to operate with certainty and complete settlement on the scheduled date.
As I said, I've talked to some CSDs in Europe. They have done some initial gap assessment. They haven't disclosed many details to me, but my understanding is that they feel kind of comfortable with their current risk framework, and obviously they've identified certain things that need to be adapted. But I think they echo what you just said, that maybe on that kind of risk framework and governance aspect, they might not be as impacted. However, I'm wondering, is there an explicit provision in DORA, or maybe something resembling that, about risk appetite when it comes to ICT risks? Because DORA is all about ICT, it's all about information and communication technologies. So does it tell financial entities and FMIs, you have to have this level of risk appetite, or you have to define it in a certain way and it has to be approved by certain people?
It does not give exact prescriptive nature of how do you go about defining risk appetite. What it basically is asking organizations to do is that as part of their digital operational resilience strategy, there has to be an element on establishing a risk tolerance level for ICT risk. And this has to be aligned to their ERM framework where risk appetite is more broadly defined. So if you look at that specific requirement, is breaking it down into two specific elements, right? One is that they have to now, from an ICT risk point of view, define risk tolerance, but they also have to ensure that they are able to kind of demonstrate that it's kind of linked to overall risk appetite of the organization. And this is something that I find it fairly challenging to kind of achieve, or at a practical level, at an implementation level. Organizations adopt various ways to kind of provide this correlation, but this would be something that someone would have to look into, whether they're crossing all the T's on this. Additionally, this has to be approved by a management body. That's what it is saying. Now, in my past experience, I've seen at an ICT risk level, it sits with a CISO from an approval point of view, or they might have an information security risk body that kind of links into it, or someone. It's not like a management body. So if it's not going to that level, it has to go now.
Is there, do you think, a case where a CSD might not have the appropriate person to approve that? So they might not have a CISO, or they might... I'm trying to think of cases like that, but I think all of them must have someone in that position by now. But I'm just wondering whether you are aware of any kind of exceptions.
The CISO would be there. I don't foresee that not to happen, at least at an FMI level, because they already were pushed by a lot of regulations to kind of achieve that. But where the CISO reports into and what are the roles and responsibilities of the CISO? If the CISO is responsible for managing ICT risk, which it should kind of be in his remit, he has to sit under a control function or a third line of defense like an audit function. So that reporting line has to be absolutely clear. The CISO cannot have a reporting within the first line. So the CISO cannot report to a CIO or a CTO. It has to be within a CRO function or an internal audit function.
You mentioned something earlier about incident response. So CSDs currently, as with everything in Europe, there's always kind of a varied approach, and some CSDs might be doing it differently than others, or more manually or more automatically. is there a specific requirement within DORA about the incident response?
Couple of things. So it's bringing harmonization on how you classify significant incidents. It kind of lays down a taxonomy to do that. So a CSD in, let's say, a Belgium versus a CSD in Bulgaria, classifying an incident significant should mean the same now because of DORA. And I think would be a great achievement overall, as the competent authorities or the supervisory authorities would look at incidents with the same lens that are being reported to them. Additionally, they are providing timeline on reporting significant incident, which is fairly prescriptive. So you have such kind of requirements that are coming in from a regulator point of view, that you need to give me an initial report within next time frame. You need to ensure that in 72 hours you are able to report something, so on and so forth. And also detailing to the extent within this report, you need to consider all of these aspects. Now that is great from a overall information collection point of view. That's going to be eventually beneficial for the entire member states of EU.
That makes sense. Since we're talking about these kind of more technical aspects, does it have specific requirements about technical testing that the FMIs and the other financial entities should be undertaking? Like, for example, penetration testing. I know most CSDs do some sort of penetration testing, but it's not consistently performed across CSDs. Others might be doing it only before they apply any changes. Others, they do it before and after. The responses and the way that they do it are varied. Is there a more kind of consistent way described in DORA?
It kind of is to an extent. And if a CSD does not do periodic pen testing at a fixed frequency, I think it might be a challenge already for them. Because what DORA is asking is, there are various ways of performing digital operational resilience testing. Pen testing is one of them. There are multiple other ways like technical testing. It's not just limited to pen test. It's requesting organizations to identify vulnerabilities or issues through numerous amount of tests. If an CSD until now has not matured enough to kind of do this on a periodic basis, on a fixed periodicity basis, they might have a challenge from a compliance point of view. Additionally, they have one more requirement, which is around threatless penetration testing, meaning that they have to contextualize specific attack vectors impacting that specific region or that specific CSD and perform a test on how their protective and defensive mechanisms react to such a threat. I would assume that some mature CSDs are already doing this and they might not have something, but if there are some markets where the CSD have not undertaken this exercise, they would have to kind of put in place some more nuanced program.
That's a very interesting point, Shreeji, because I have to admit I wasn't aware of the extent of the testing that is prescribed in DORA. So this sounds very sophisticated for some of the CSDs that I know, at least. And I bet you they're not familiar with all these different types of testing. So how much big of a challenge do you think that's going to be for them? So how can they adapt? How can they move forward with that?
There are a couple of ways that DORA has kind of already provided guidance on. So they have said, okay, you could have like an internal assessment team or a testing team, and they've kind of provided some guidelines as to what are the qualifications of such a testing team. Additionally, they can go for an external provider, and these are the services which I believe are fairly commodity now. There are so many providers who offer these kind of services. They should be able to select from a variety of such providers. So it's at an execution level, it's not that challenging to kind of address this gap, but it would require some investments, some budgetary allocations to do this on an ongoing basis.
It's, as with other regulations in Europe, this starts to sound like a costly exercise. And I'm thinking about CSDs that the whole IT department might be just one or two persons. Are we looking at situations where the CSDs would have to invest more in people and technology because of DORA?
There would definitely be need to invest in technology if the size of your IT team or the information security team is fairly small, because then you could leverage technology to augment, manpower to a certain extent, like running risk management process or running third-party risk assessments. And they would definitely need to look at the sourcing model. I think a very important point that DORA has brought in is that management body that we spoke about earlier. They are also tasked with ensuring that they have sufficient resources allocated for ensuring that ICT risk management framework is adequately implemented. So, at a management body now, there is a requirement that they need to undertake this. So they should be identifying gaps at a resourcing level, at a management body level now, and taking that input in.
Very interesting. Since we are talking about staff and budgeting, I know that some CSDs currently in Europe, they don't spend as much on training staff, and especially when it comes to IT, they might train just risk staff or very particular kind of group of employees. Is that changing under DORA? Are there specific requirements about training? And what about senior management? Are they captured from the training requirements?
I would widen the scope. So it's not just training, but it's more awareness and having knowledge around ICT risk. So they expect some level of competency to sit within the management body and people who are catered to manage ICT risk, that they understand the landscape, they understand the context. So it's bringing a level of awareness to those folks. And if the organization has, implemented, I hate to use the term, but tick in the box exercise of doing some sort of, training sessions, like one training session only a year, that's not going to fly, because they have to demonstrate what they are doing to bring this additional requirements around management body having sufficient understanding of the landscape.
As far as FMI preparedness is concerned, should they be doing anything when looking at DORA from the opposite side? So them as being critical providers or third-party providers to other entities, financial entities within Europe, because some CSDs might have services that might fall under DORA. So should they be looking at that and how they should be responding?
Yes. So in this case, now this is something that we still have to internally go and vet. But considering CSDs as a third party is, from a DORA point of view, is not the case, because there are specific exclusion within DORA that financial entities providing ICT services to other financial entities, they are not considered as ICT third parties.
Fantastic. Okay, that's clear. I had a question which I should have asked perhaps a bit earlier. I think you probably covered it in your response already, but about recording the anomalies and the events. And I think probably I would like to expand the question, because we know that CSDs have a risk register, they have a risk matrix, they monitor all the risks which they are exposed there, and they assign criticality, they monitor incidents. So from a DORA perspective, within the DORA framework, do they need to have a different risk register just for these ICT risks? Can they put it into their general risk matrix? And how should they record any anomalies, incidents, events that are happening? And should it happen manually, automatically? Can they just have a spreadsheet? Does DORA specify a more strict and structured way of doing it?
So I'll break down the question in couple of points. So the first one was, does it go into enterprise risk register or a separate ICT risk register? From a practicality and implementation, in my experience, ICT risks are captured and recorded separately, which is purely from a volume point of view. And there would be linkages to the enterprise risk register, but then it would be at some consolidated level with certain risk categories. So ICT risk should be recorded separately from an enterprise risk point of view. On recording anomalies and incidents, now this is also a separate register or a inventory log, if you will, where this is logged as an event, as an incident, and there are specific processes that kind of designed to kind of what is the event to incident escalation path and all that. Risk is something that is supposed to happen in the future. And when we're talking about events and incidents, it has something that has occurred. Now, if that incident that has been registered has possibility to create further risk, then it goes into the risk register, if you see what I mean. So we consider events and incident as an issue log because that is something already happened, and risk is something that could possibly happen. So again, it would be two separate registers.
So, as we said, it's a very tight deadline. It's less than 12 months away. What happens if an entity is not compliant with DORA by mid-January 2025? Are there any penalties for non-compliance? Are there any sanctions?
What is clear at this stage is organizations have to be compliant by 17 Jan 2025. Now, then there'll be an element of competent authorities or supervisory authorities going and performing some sort of assessment. So there would be some time frame that would be available for organizations to kind of still buck up, but they are expected to be compliant, but the regulatory action may take time. Now, what happens if there is some sort of DORA non-compliance? There could be an administrative fines that would be levied by these competent authorities. Now, this has been left to individual member states and their competent authorities to determine what should be the extent of these fines. There could be public reprimands depending on the severity of non-compliance. There could be possibility even orders to provide compensatory damages because of a DORA non-compliance. Someone has faced some losses. So these are various tools that the competent authorities would have. There is no single answer what would happen. But the idea is that there would be some sort of reputation risk at stake of non-compliance and possibly even financial losses.
The $1 million question, do you think there will be an extension? I mean, we've seen quite frequently in Europe last minute extensions of a year or 2 years when entities are kind of need more time, let's say, to comply. So what do you think from experience, Shreeji? Because I would bet there will be an extension, but it would be an 11th hour one.
I would have loved to be able to guess this to even remotely educated guess, but my hunch is that there would not be any extension.
Really? Okay, that's a very interesting take. We'll see. We won't put a wager on it, but yeah, we'll see next January.
But it's a good bet to do, Panos, if you are there and against it.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed that view from the EU's markets. If you have any comments, feedback or questions for Shreeji or Panos, please get in touch. Just visit thomasmurray.com or email us, dora@thomasmurray.com. Those details are in the show notes, along with how to access all our other DORA-related content. Next up, Shreeji will be talking third-party risk with Phoebe Jordan and Nita Sinha. And I must say, Shreeji deals with that grilling rather heroically. See you then.